Well, hi everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of Infection Control Matters. Brett Mitchell here, and Martin's joined me on Zoom. G'day, Martin.
Hello, Brett. Good to see you.
You too. Now, just before we started this podcast, I said to Martin, "What are we going to talk about, Martin?" And he said, "Wait and see." So the suspense is killing me as well.
Yeah,
well, I've got an inkling.
Yeah, I mean, random things float through my mind, and there's a couple of things floating around at the moment that I've been doing a little bit of work on that actually have collided a bit. So I'm
Not
working with you.
Chance.
Yeah, well, I'm working with you on a healthcare and associated pneumonia trial, and I've been looking at videos on preventing healthcare associated pneumonia on YouTube just to see what information's out there and how people are putting good stuff out. But also I'm doing a talk in a week or so in Cardiff about preventing C. diff infections through environmental decontamination. And you think, what the hell have they got to do with each other? Well, interestingly, on one video I found on preventing healthcare-associated pneumonia, the number one piece of advice...
And you do have to pause before they say this.
I am going to... was to actually put the toilet seat down. And the second piece of advice was actually to make sure there's always water in your U-bend in your sinks as well. I'm thinking, okay, I can think of many things that might prevent a healthcare-associated pneumonia, but not putting the toilet seat down. And then I was thinking about, okay, C. diff, environmental contamination, and toilets cropped up a bit there as well. And I browsed the recent papers being published, and I came across a paper from Charles Gerber as well, from America, who's been doing what many people do and put a bit of MS2 bacteriophage down into a toilet and looking at whether the toilet seat up or down makes a difference. And that's often a discussion, I think. Do you put your toilet seat up or down, and should you even have a toilet seat on a toilet in a healthcare setting? So I had a little bit of a look around in that area as well, and unsurprisingly, it shows me just how much I do not know about this subject and how I'm really not an expert in physics and droplet science, etc., etc., etc. And yet we tend to make decisions on whether a toilet has a toilet seat or not. Now, the Gerber study... and
before you go any further, man, so I'm sort of thinking, okay, before you have the spoiler alert, I'm kind of, if you're listening to this, think now about whether or not you think having a toilet seat down would be a good idea to reduce contamination, aerosols, or I guess aerosols containing bacteria. Now, my first thought would be, well, it kind of makes sense because, you're confining the potential spread by having the toilet seat down. And then I'm sort of thinking, well, maybe when you lift up the toilet seat, you get a big waft. I don't know. So I'm fascinated. Of course, a lot of places don't even have toilet seats in public areas anyway. But
no, that's right. But then you start thinking, hang on a minute, how many different things could actually affect this? What's coming out of the toilet. Firstly, the material you put down it.
Yeah,
how solid how solid or otherwise it might be. Is it covered over with toilet paper? If you're using toilet paper, what's the power of the flush? I've been in toilets where hardly anything comes out, and you've got to pump the handle a million times, or you touch the handle and Niagara Falls comes down. And that's the problem. I then went looking from a C. diff point of view, and Mark Wilcox and Eve Best produced a paper a few years ago now, I think it's 2012, saying that toilet seat up was bad news for C. diff. But the Gerber paper says toilet seat up or down makes no difference for virus particles. Now, is that to do with the size of the matter?
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking. What would be the fundamental difference there? Because the physics, all things being equal, then what would be different from a virus to a bacteria?
Yeah, well, especially presumably a bacterial spore by then as well. So I suppose it could be the density of the material in the toilet, whereas if you're sticking a bit of bacteriophage down the toilet or a virus, it's possibly a bit more liquid. I'm thinking norovirus or something like that, it's rarely people have a formed stool when they're having a norovirus issue. Whereas C. diff, yeah, it could be diarrhea, but of course there are people who are asymptomatic carriers and could even be constipated with C. diff. So how does that affect it? So I think there are so many different factors that could affect this. I'm not sure how you actually get an answer. And the other issue, of course, is if the toilet seat's down when you go in, how on earth do you not contaminate your hands? People just lift up the toilet seat, park their backside, pull the phone out of their pocket often.
Yeah.
Doing today's Wordle or word quiz or reading the paper or checking their emails, because I know people when they're sitting on the toilet these days, they tend to be pretty much multitasking all the time.
Yeah.
So then where does the contamination from that go? Because you might clean your hands after using the toilet. Hopefully you do. But what have you been touching in the meantime? So,
and you're probably not going to wipe your phone down.
No. I mean, I can remember the days when people used to go to the toilet for a smoke, which meant the thing they touched on the way into the toilet was the last thing somebody touched without cleaning their hands when they got up from the toilet, so they might as well have stuck the cigarette between the cheeks of the previous person's backside. That wasn't particularly hygienic either, but I'm really not sure we buttoned down toilet hygiene, to be absolutely honest.
No, you're absolutely right about all those variables. Maybe the answer is a randomized control adaptive platform study where you can add in different variables as you go, as you work out the relative impact of each of them. But that's for another day. But it's a fascinating topic, and I think you're right. It does show how much little we probably know about the most basic of things, because I think it's quite conflicting. So what would you do, man? If you had someone in your house with neuro, would you say flush the toilet with the lid down or the lid up?
I would probably say put the lid down, but then I'd be in there decontaminating the toilet after they've been.
Maybe say if you've got a disinfectant or something you're going to put down your toilet, maybe do that before you flush.
Well, actually, that was part of the most recent Gerber study. They found by putting a disinfectant in the toilet water, it did actually reduce environmental contamination. That was hydrochloric acid, I think, in this particular case. But then you're into what concentration, how much water is there, what's the dilution like, what's the contact time like. But I have to say, when I first started in infection prevention, as you do when you've just done the course, as it was in the UK, you then become the expert and you think you know everything, which I've now realised 30 years on that I really don't. And I can remember a guy coming to see me with a device he'd invented to go into a toilet system which would give out a particular amount of chlorine each time you flush the toilet and would disinfect the bowl. And I was a bit rude, I've got to be honest, because I'm thinking, well, water in the UK coming through into toilets is drinking water. Therefore, it's got less than 1 coliform per X mil. And so really, what's the problem here? Because we're already putting clean water into the toilet. What's the point of putting the disinfectant in without thinking about plume or aerosol? And now I'm a bit embarrassed about that. And if I met him again now, I'd be saying, well, maybe you have got something there that I should have been listening a little bit more instead of just dismissing you out of hand. So, and
if he happens to be listening, please do get in contact with us.
Well, as it's the beginning of my career, he's probably no longer with us, unfortunately, because that's really quite some time ago. But this is one of these I have no clue really, because I actually and I can't find the paper, but I did find one study that showed with the toilet seat down, you do get reduce contamination around the edges of the toilet, but the contamination goes further because, of course, the air rush, when there's quite a lot of turbulence going on, goes through a smaller gap. Therefore, particles can go further away.
Yeah. And that's where that velocity of the flush becomes an important factor.
Absolutely.
The other question would be, does this actually make a difference to patient outcomes anyway?
Well, people do walk stuff all over the place. I mean, there was a paper from Tim Boswell, Nick Mahida, looking at what's on the floor, and they sampled this by using the no-slip socks that you put on when you to stop the elderly falling in hospital, and they found VRE on virtually every single sock. So that must have been people, well, potentially, I suppose, walking to and from the toilet and then climbing back onto the bed. And so picking up contamination. And Donsky's done work showing if you put a bit of bacteriophage in a 1 metre square in the floor of a side room, you find it absolutely everywhere. So, I suspect the risk really is contamination getting on the floor, being wandered around all over the place. Donsky's work showed that the bacteriophages was getting from the floor onto the nurses' base keyboards. They were all contaminated within a day.
Was that the mosaic cauliflower?
Yeah. Well, it's a similar sort of principle because that was Wahlberg's original work. So there's plenty we don't know yet, really. And there are a number of papers in journals like Indoor Air and some fluid dynamics papers that show that actually the velocity of the flush does affect the amount of spread. But I should think, having walked in hospitals, every toilet flush is at a different rate.
Yeah,
because they're also non-standard, and the plumbing behind them is often non-standard as well.
There's probably an engineer out there who has designed something that sucks away air, perhaps at the same time as that velocity of fluid is going through, or maybe not, but that would be interesting. But well, I guess it's only a problem though if it's causing a problem elsewhere. But I suspect, as you say, that contamination would occur, and so therefore there is that potential transmission risk. Quantifying that will be near impossible, but it's certainly certainly there.
It's just one of these unknown unknowns. There's a potential problem there, and you have no idea what the scope of it is. And
so going right back now to the HAP study, the study that we're working on, Martin, about preventing pneumonia.
Yeah.
And it's a multi-centre RCT that's going to be starting in a few months' time in Australia. Your take on that video where you're looking for resources, and actually you did send that video to me, and it was I think from an infection control team, or it was from some, which is interesting. Anyway, do you think now there's any plausible, having explored the toilet issue, do you think there's any plausible mechanism by which flushing a toilet would be an important prevention strategy for HAP?
Well, given that most of the okay.
Well, I laugh, and in 5 years' time, I could be regretting saying.
I know. We could be digging ourselves a big hole here and exposing ourselves to ridicule in the future, although possibly in the past as well. I suppose if you get contamination on your hands and then your hands go to your mouth could become colonized with organisms that become an issue. And I know when we talked to Victoria Ewan quite some time ago, if there were particular organisms in your mouth, including E. coli, you're more likely to get a healthcare-associated pneumonia.
And that identical pathogen that's right. And I think the identical pathogen that was found in the upper respiratory tract was found in sputum and other bronchial lavage. That's some of the work that she done. So you're right. I think there's an important role of thinking about oral mucosa colonization with hospital pathogens that subsequently cause a reservoir or are a potential reservoir for pneumonia, subsequent pneumonia infection. So,
but it's back
that
to
could be one way.
Hand hygiene and teeth cleaning. That would mitigate that risk.
Yeah. And ventilation, perhaps, in the case of plumes.
I mean, one of those videos actually went on to say you should always make sure there's water in the U-bend as well. I'd struggle with that one, I have to say.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be my number one, I have to say. Good advice would be don't kneel on the floor while you're flushing the toilet with the lid up.
Well, that's what I was going to say. That's right. Got to stop those patients sticking their heads in the toilet whilst they... If they go to yes, interesting. Well, always good chatting, Martin. And hopefully we do get some decent resources for the website.
Well, I think creating will be helpful. Yeah,
I think so, yeah. Always good chatting, Martin. And thanks, everyone, for listening to the latest edition of Infection Control Matters.
Yeah, we'll try and come up with something a bit more sensible next time that we actually know something about. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.